All right, well, shifting gears now to Iran, where protests are calming down this weekend after President Trump thanked Iranian leaders for not executing hundreds of detained demonstrators. Here's what President Trump said just yesterday.
Did Arab and Israeli officials convince you to not strike Iran?
Nobody convinced me. I convinced myself. You had yesterday scheduled over 800 hangings. They didn't hang anyone. They canceled the hangings. That had a big impact.
So does it end there, or is this part of the president's strategy? Remember when Caroline Leavitt said this last year?
Now, regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks."
Now, that was ahead of the highly successful bombing of Fordow, and it wasn't 2 weeks. In fact, it was just 4 days later that the U.S. launched an attack on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, resulting in the end of a 12-day war between Iran and Israel. President Trump pulled off a total head fake, and Caroline Leavitt's statement, along with decoy bombers, was designed to give the Iranians the impression that there was still time for negotiation when, in fact, military preparations were well underway. Now, back to this week, President Trump acknowledging that the progress on the deadly protests might have made a difference. But are we seeing another head fake? Will he strike? Should he strike? And if so, when will he strike? Let's bring in Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane. General Keane, any chance this is strategic deception, or do you think President Trump is happy with where he is with Iranian leaders?
Well, I don't think there's any deception at all. I mean, we're obviously planning and preparing for a potential strike. I mean, we've told everybody pretty much that. We're bringing in ships from all over the place. We're moving people off bases. I don't think there's any secret here or any deception in terms of what's taken place, to be quite frank about it. I mean, what I think is actually happening here is the president and his military team are trying to make certain if and when they strike, they get it right. And what am I talking about here? Well, when you plan a strike against multiple targets, you have to consider what is the adversary going to do in retaliation. So one of the things they would do, likely because they've done it before, is attack U.S. bases. So we have to make certain that those bases are going to be protected and be able to withstand that attack. Number two, they would likely attack Israel. That's a fact. And that is probably part of the conversation that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump had. And I would assume in that conversation, don't know, that we have considered that reality and probably making certain that our target set is expanded somewhat to make certain that Iranians' offensive capability not only to take down our bases and hurt our people at U.S. bases, but also to inflict casualties on the Israeli population and military targets. In other words, we would be expanding to take down ballistic missiles in addition to Iranian leadership, in addition to command and control, in addition to the people that are on the streets killing wantonly the Iranian people. So I think an attempt here for time is to try to get this right in terms of doing it. Now, the second thing that's brought up there about the Iranians telling us they're not going to kill the people, just put that in the trash can, that statement, because the evidence is against all of that. After the 12-day war, they imprisoned 22,000 people, loosely described as sympathizers or informants to Israel. The Mossad would have loved to have had 22,000 informants, believe me. They were trying to intimidate the population so they don't protest. And what did they do? They killed 1,500 of them. 1,500. How do we know that? Because they hang them by a huge crane and they want the public to see it. It's actually strangulation is what takes place because they don't break their neck. This is a brutal, barbaric regime. And those people that they put in jail now, some 20,000, they will get around to hanging thousands of them, regardless of the statements that are being made to American diplomats. Because why? That is who they are. And that's what we're facing here in dealing with these people.
General Keane, do you think this moment is different from the other moments of protest? I mean, the Iranian regime has never been weaker. The proxy is essentially demolished around the globe. Do you think the Iranian regime is here, let's say, this time next year?
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody can predict that, but I think your question is right on the mark. Yes, this is a different time. Well, first of all, the scale and size of the demonstrations and the reason for the demonstrations are quite different. The big one back in 2009, election fraud. The last one in 22 was about headdress after Masha Amini was killed. This one is about regime. It started with economic woes, to be sure, but it all is about changing the regime, getting rid of this regime. And that has what mobilized the population because they're in a hopeless situation. So that is different in of itself. The intensity of the Iranian response here, they have now brought in thousands of Iraqi militia. They are on the streets with the Baji militia, with the IRGC troops, walking up and down the streets with pickup trucks and machine guns on the corners, preventing any of the citizens from coming out of their houses. If they do, they shoot at them and they kill them right there because they don't want the protesters back on the streets again. That is another indication that this is a different time. The best I think we could achieve along the lines that you're implying here, if we hit them and hit them hard and punish their leaders for the hell that they inflicted on the population, almost 3,000 dead, 20,000 in prison as a start, that I think puts that on a pathway to the regime collapsing because they are in such poor fundamental economic, political, and military shape right now. It's the worst condition, Kaylee, that they've had in the 45, 47 years these guys have been in power.
Wow, the worst position in 45, 47 years. That's incredible. General Jack Keane, we're following it. We appreciate you being here on your Saturday. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.